There was a time, long before the buzz of phones, the flash of screens, and the ticking of anxious clocks, when people simply lived, one sunrise at a time. In a valley untouched by road signs and too quiet for maps to bother with, there lived a man, not famous, not feared, known only by the whispers of wind and the soft-spoken awe of old villagers. They called him the Planter. No one remembered his true name. Some believed he had once been a scholar, a man of thought, lost in books. Others claimed he had never spoken a word at all. But what was known, if stories passed down by quiet grandmothers and wide-eyed children could be trusted, was that each morning, before even the birds had stretched their wings, he walked the earth, and he planted, not wheat, not flowers, not food for belly or beauty. He planted something no one had ever seen take root before: time. Each seed, pressed gently into the earth with a care that bordered on reverence, held something abstract. Not a substance, but an idea. Patience, humility, stillness, presence. He never named them. He never spoke them aloud. But somehow the soil understood. Because the land, unlike the world, does not need explanation. It simply listens. People didn't understand, of course. The villagers, simple and hurried as all villagers become, when routine outpaces wonder, would glance his way and mutter beneath their breath. "You can't grow time," they'd scoff. "It slips through your fingers, not into the dirt." Foolish old man, always walking, always digging, always alone. And still, he smiled, not out of arrogance, not even defiance, but a quiet, inward kind of knowing, like the smile of a river that's seen the mountain melt 10,000 times and doesn't feel the need to explain itself. He wore a coat the color of dusk, patched in places, faded by seasons. His hat, wide-brimmed and slightly crooked, shaded eyes that seemed too calm to be hurried. And his satchel, worn but sturdy, was filled not with tools but with small pouches of dust, petals, and fragments of memory. He lived just outside the village, in a cabin that leaned slightly to one side, as if it, too, had grown tired of standing straight. Smoke rose gently from his chimney, but rarely did anyone see him rest. He walked, he paused, he bent down, he planted, and day after day, for years uncounted, he did the same. He didn't ask the earth to bloom. He didn't demand the sky to rain. He simply offered his small gifts to the ground, tiny containers of presence, of pause, of meaning, and trusted that time would do the rest. You see, the planter understood something most of us forget: that not everything that grows must be seen, that not all roots feed trees, and that maybe, just maybe, if you plant time, someday it might grow back. The valley had long, slow seasons. Rain didn't fall in a rush. It wandered gently from the sky, like a thought finding its way into words. Snow arrived not with noise but with a hush, dusting the earth in quiet softness. Even the wind seemed to move slower there, as if it respected the rhythm of the place. And in the silence between these subtle moods of weather, the planter worked. There were days when he planted nothing. He would stand perfectly still, his eyes closed, head slightly tilted, as if listening to something most people had forgotten how to hear. The rustle of leaves speaking to each other, the sigh of a root shifting deep underground, the barely audible hum of the world turning. He believed silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. His home was simple, a small wooden cabin tucked between a grove of tall grasses and a stream that mumbled quietly to itself. Inside, there was no clock to measure the hours, no mirror to reflect the passage of years, no calendar to mark the days. There was only a single phrase carved into the wooden beam above his bed: "Growth doesn't ask for your attention." He would rise with the first shade of light on the horizon and sleep when the sky had turned dark enough to erase the day. Meals were plain: roots, grains, herbs, gathered or traded. But he never rushed a meal, never ate while standing. Each moment was whole, each task was enough. The villagers would sometimes catch glimpses of him near the edge of the field, his hands resting in the soil, his eyes distant. Children whispered stories about what he might be: a wizard perhaps, a spirit, a tree that had decided to walk, but no one ever asked him directly. He had become, to them, part of the valley itself, Not quite man, not quite myth, just there. Steady, quiet, constant. And still, each day he planted. The seeds he placed into the ground didn't sprout right away. Many never sprouted at all. But that didn't seem to matter. He wasn't measuring results. He was practicing presence. Because the planter understood something else too. Something even rarer than silence. He knew that to truly grow something timeless, you had to be willing to wait longer than anyone else was willing to wait. You had to move slower than the world thought was useful. You had to trust in things you might never see. And so, in the long, deliberate seasons of silence, the planter planted, listened, and lived. Not above time, not behind it, but inside it. Time, as the villagers knew it, was for keeping, for cutting, for chasing and managing and worrying over. It was a currency, a threat, a taskmaster. So when the planter continued his quiet rituals year after year, the people began to wonder. Not in awe, but in suspicion. Is he all there? They'd ask behind closed doors. Probably touched by solitude, someone would whisper, as if silence were contagious. Or maybe just tired of living the way we do. The children who once watched him with curiosity now found other games. The adults who once gave him space out of politeness now gave it out of pity. Still, he did not change. The same path, the same small satchel of seeds, the same deep stillness before the planting. What changed was the world around him. New families moved into the valley, bringing with them sharper tools and louder ways. They cleared land quickly, built homes quickly, ate quickly, worked quickly. They brought clocks that chirped and buzzed, calendars with too many notes, and the habit of filling silence before it could settle. The planter became an oddity, a curiosity, at best a story, at worst a burden. Why doesn't he farm something useful? Is he even doing anything out there? Looks like nothing's growing. One man, a merchant who'd built his home near the grove, confronted the planter one morning. He was polite, in the way people are when they believe themselves to be right. "What exactly is it you're trying to do, old man?" The planter looked at him kindly, his eyes soft with the weight of many dawns. "I'm planting time," he said. The merchant laughed. "Then maybe plant a little more. We could all use some extra hours." The planter smiled but said nothing more, because he knew that time, real time, the kind that heals and reveals, cannot be added, only remembered, only invited. And so he kept planting. Every day as doubt thickened like smoke in the village, he pressed one more idea into the soil. Trust, not in results, not in approval, but in rhythm. He didn't argue with those who misunderstood. He didn't try to explain or convert. He simply remained, rooted in his purpose, undisturbed by the winds of other people's urgency. And even though the villagers grew impatient, even though they couldn't see the fruits of his labor, the ground beneath them was changing, softening, listening, becoming something more than just earth, becoming ready. It began as all important things do, quietly, a faint shimmer in the morning dew, a hush in the air that didn't belong to weather, a breeze that seemed to pause as it passed through a certain patch of land. No one noticed at first. The grove where the planter had spent most of his days was unremarkable. Just a clearing, really, where the grass grew taller than usual and the soil stayed soft all year round. But then something changed. Children, chasing each other in games that made them forget themselves, would run into the grove and stop. Not because they were told to, not because they saw something frightening, but because something unseen told them to slow down, to listen, to feel. They would sit, and they didn't know why. Some laid back and looked at the sky through the branches. Some picked up handfuls of earth and let the grains fall through their fingers. Some simply breathed, deeply, like they hadn't in months. And when they left, they didn't talk about it. They didn't know how. Only that it had felt good, like sleeping after a long day of pretending. The adults noticed next. Arguments that had festered for weeks suddenly seemed pointless after a walk through the grove. Those who had trouble sleeping began visiting at dusk and found their thoughts no longer tangled. Some came with heavy shoulders and left without realizing they'd stood up straighter.
The trees were changing, too. Not in size, they didn't shoot up with the urgency of ambition. They unfolded. Their bark was smoother. Their roots seemed to reach not just outward, but inward. The leaves shimmered not with light, but with calm. A kind of inner stillness that reflected everything around them in soft, green silence. No birds sang in the grove. They came but not to make noise, they simply perched, as if resting from the act of being a bird. People began to give it names: the still place, the listening grove, Whisperwood, but the planter never called it anything. He simply kept planting. By now, many had stopped mocking him. They still didn't understand, but understanding felt less important now. There was a peace in not knowing, in not naming, in simply letting something be. One evening, a child asked the planter, "What do the seeds grow into?" He looked at her for a long moment, then pointed to her chest. "Time," he said, "grows where it's needed." The child didn't ask more. She didn't need to. That night, the stars over the grove pulsed a little slower, and even the moon seemed to pause as it passed overhead. And all through the darkness, the planter moved quietly among the trees, scattering seeds of presence, like someone who had never rushed a thing in his life. Because he hadn't, and because he knew, once time takes root, the soul grows still. It wasn't thunder that signaled the coming storm. It was wheels, heavy, iron-rimmed, ambition-drenched wheels, rolling across the valley's dirt like punctuation marks in a sentence no one wanted to read. The men who stepped down from the carriages wore polished boots and matching expressions. Their words were sharp, their laughter louder than necessary. They measured the valley not in beauty or breadth, but in cost and potential. Progress had come. They brought maps, but none that showed the grove. They carried documents, plans, contracts all sterile with the scent of urgency. "This land is underused," one said. "Perfect for development." The villagers resisted, at first with politeness, then with worrying, and finally with the kind of desperation that only arises when something sacred is at risk and no one has the right words to explain why. But the officials didn't listen. They saw the grove as empty space. Wasted land, no crops, no property lines, no profit. They sent men with axes to begin clearing the way. And that's when the villagers stood between them and the trees. Not all of them, but enough: mothers, teachers, children holding hands with their elders. Some wept, some shouted. A few simply sat, refusing to move. The grove didn't roar in protest. It didn't lash out or summon storms. It remained what it had always been, still. But within that stillness was a tension deeper than any fury. Then came the planter. He stepped into the grove, past the crowd, and stood where the first tree had grown, his hands empty, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue or plead. He simply packed his satchel, now lighter than ever, and walked out of the valley barefoot, as if trying to feel the last of what he loved beneath his solace. The grove, when he left, did not cry out, but those who remained said they heard something soft as dust on bark, gentle as the last page of a book being turned. And then silence, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention, but holds it nonetheless. They came the next day with machines. They cleared trees. They dug up soil. They tried to break what could not be broken. And though they built what they came to build, though they paved and drilled and wired the land into obedience, it never welcomed them. The walls cracked. The roads washed out. The machines rusted faster than expected. Nothing stayed, because nothing wanted to. The storm had won its battle, but the land had not surrendered. Because deep in the earth, beneath concrete and calculation, Something still pulsed, something planted.